And again, let me just warmly welcome you on this beautiful fall day. It's great to have you here. It's great to have our guests here. And the objective, as I described to our panelists today, was to share with the group a little bit about the history of Old Town Chinatown. Peter Englander, who's a senior director, project director, if I got that right.
Good enough.
Okay.
Just gave me a promotion.
I think he's just senior.
That's right. Get to be that.
Who I've had the great pleasure to get to know over the time that I've been here at the college, and as we got more interested in the site in Old Town Chinatown, attending meetings that Peter has facilitated with principals from the area. It's just been an incredible experience. He has a wealth of knowledge about where Old Town Chinatown has come from, what it's been through, the successes that have been realized, those ideas that did not come to fruition, what has happened in recent years, and then the vision for the future. I actually went and dug up information about the Old Town Chinatown vision plan from 1997, development plan from 1999, and the vision development plan update in 2003. And then on top of that, Peter also was instrumental in helping to run a series of charrettes, and I think that was in 2006 or 7.
Which ones?
We had where we did the architects were involved.
Yeah. That was 2007, I think. Yeah.
So there has been a lot of work that's been done on this, and we're really pleased to have Peter here with us because as an integral part of PDC, he has really been at ground level with a lot of this. Pete H. Spieler, who some of you know, and Brad Nelson from Beam Development. And before Pete hooked up with this criminal over here at the end, guilty as charged, as part of Beam Development, Pete worked at the Portland Development Commission for a number of years as well. So I think we have a great brain trust here that can provide you with an encapsulated view of what's been going on in Old Town Chinatown over the last 12 to 15 years and what the future looks like and how OCOM coming into the mix fits in the whole big picture. So please join me in warmly welcoming our panelists.
So Michael, you'd like me to give a big picture history of what's going on in the neighborhood over the last, well, I can go 20 or 30 years, give you some perspective. I'll focus probably on the last 10 or so, and then give you some perspective on where we think the neighborhood is going, or I think the questions that are up for discussion about where the neighborhood is going. The most important point of this is that I think over the last 5 or 6 years, with incredible involvement by the Oregon College of Oriental Medicine for an institution and organizations that's not even in Old Town Chinatown yet, I think this is going to be a real pivotal time for the neighborhood when you guys finally come down, and we are very, very excited. We've all been working on this project for 5+ years, and you'll hear about that. But I think there'll be a real pivot point when Oregon College of Oriental Medicine comes down for a variety of reasons. And I think that one of the fun things about our work is we talk about things for a very, very long period of time, and we're never prepared for what the visceral reaction and the physical reaction that happens when something truly comes to fruition. And for many of us, the fruition was closing the transaction so we could start construction of the building, but the real meaningful point will be when all of you come down. That's when it's really gonna, we're gonna really feel it in many, many, many ways. And we're exhausted, so we're gonna need you guys to follow through. Old Town Chinatown has had a long history, and I am not the right person to talk about the history of this oldest part of town from when Portland started. I certainly have a passing interest in it and have some information. But as you may know, this is the oldest part of Portland, at least what really got started in the 1850s. And through its many, many years, as Portland grew up and became a big shipping and manufacturing town, it also became home to a variety of ethnic cultures. That is true of African Americans, especially its proximity to the train station, because there's a building on the corner of Everett and Broadway where all the African American conductors used to stay when they were in town, and there's a whole history just to that. To the Greeks and the Jews who started many businesses down in this particular area, and then of course the Chinese and the Japanese as well. This, I believe, was essentially the Chinese. When one thinks of Chinatown, it's really their third Chinatown in Portland. So this was by no means the first, but it was essentially the one where there was that major concentration for some period of time, and there was this incredible overlap with the Japanese culture as well. And unfortunately, Anne Adel Campbell is not here today, but she's really one of the best people to talk about that. Throughout that history, Old Town Chinatown, as well as a few other parts of town, also became known as Skid Row, and I think you're all aware of that. And I think that the city has put a lot of effort over a number of years to try to move this part of town away from that. And there's been more traction and more momentum in moving away from that belief and perception than ever before. You will read things in the paper that may not necessarily reflect that, and that's, in my view, a perception of just some people that have perceptions about the neighborhood. Right now, I will tell you there are more people working in that neighborhood, there are more people living in that neighborhood than there has been in many, many, many years. And we hope to continue that momentum, and I'll explain to you how we've tried to set up that for the future. The two places where I think I'll try to give you some recent perspective is when the Portland Development Commission, which has been around for some 50+ years now, started to do work in this part of town, and that was with the creation of an urban renewal area in 1974, the downtown waterfront urban renewal area. Urban renewal is a technique that was used. It's a term from the 1950s and the 1960s. I don't think it truly reflects the kind of work that we do today, but often the idea was, especially in the 50s and 60s, scrape a piece of land, start from scratch. And that's what PDC did in its first years of history, and that was evident if you look around Keller Auditorium. That's exactly what we did, and we're still vilified for that, and deservedly so. But we've changed the way we do work in a great number of ways. And I think some of the more physical representations of that in Old Town Chinatown really came through in the 80s and 90s, when we started to do work both in the North Park blocks, and there are a number of housing developments that occurred that got done in the North Park blocks, plus some efforts of Ann's father, Bill Nato, where he, I think, fairly single-handedly tried to revitalize Old Town Chinatown somewhere in the 80s and 90s as well. In the 1990s, there was a major effort that culminated a couple of things. First of all, from what I understand, the business association started to fall apart. The social service or community-based organizations were not talking to each other and coordinating with each other. Everybody was off kind of doing their own thing. And some leaders in the neighborhood, which included major operators of the community-based organizations, most notably people like Richard Harris from Central City Concern, and folks like Phil Calbearer from the Calbearer Company, owned an amount of property, and many other people, got together what ultimately became a visions group. And the cool thing about the visions group was it was a way of truly being able to coordinate and talk to each other for the benefit of the entire neighborhood. In a way probably very different from many other neighborhoods similar to it in other parts of the country. And it was an amazing way to be able to coordinate how public investment would come to this neighborhood, where it would go, what would the objectives be, and out of that came the plans and ideas that that Michael referred to in the Old Town Visions Plan. The Visions Plan is very different from most plans as you probably think of them. When we use the word plan, you probably think about land use. You think about, you've got a piece of land, what do you do with it, what are the plans for it? Well, the Visions Plan was much different from that. It was what's called a verbal plan, and that was, how are we going to work together to achieve some things? So it's all about coordination, it's all about communication in trying to achieve some end. And it was with that they were able to coalesce around a more specific development plan. And in many ways, when I started to work in the neighborhood in 2005, I took those two documents as my job. I was supposed to implement that work and work with this organization that had been created. Another reason that organization came to fruition, most notably, was that the Neighborhood Association, which is a system that started in Portland in the 70s, wasn't really working that well. So they thought that they would create this organization instead and bring together the property owners, the business owners, and the folks that operated the community-based organization. Because at that time there was nobody who, there were no residents who owned property down there. There were no condominiums of any kind. There were no single-family homes. At that point, and this is relatively unique to Portland, different from places like San Francisco and Seattle. The Chinese community and the Japanese community had left. Some were forced out, and others chose to leave. Not different from many other immigrant communities. I just came back from Cleveland, Ohio, and most immigrant communities, when they wanted to start living the American dream, they moved out of the places that they were living in and wanted to live in the suburbs like everybody else. So Portland really didn't have that. What they had now was a lot of low-income residents in some buildings that were in some pretty bad shape. So I think the first thing that really started to get some traction in Old Town Chinatown was when Central City Concern was able to, bit by bit, able to start and improve a number of the low-income housing operations or buildings down there. And I would say to you today that probably 90% of the buildings that house people who make less than 30–40% of average income have been fixed up, and they're pretty darn nice, and they're managed really, really well. And I think that was a fundamental baseline objective that needed to occur. The other things that really occurred, and this was right around 1999–2000, was the Chinese Garden, which was a big thing, a very, very big thing, as well as some other kinds of housing developments occurring. For the first time, there was middle-income housing, people who made $50,000, $60,000, $40,000, $50,000, $60,000. We started to do some development so that they could move into the neighborhood, and there were a couple. There's now 3 buildings in Old Town Chinatown that have that kind of mix, including the one that's right across from the Portland Development Commission, or 2 that are right across from us, and then one that's right around the corner very close to the Chinese Garden. In 2000, there was also another major initiative that fell on its face, and that was the Creative Services Center, which Pete at some point had responsibility for. That was our answer to an incubator at the time when the .com was supposed to continue to explode. And we happened to open that building right around 9/11 and right around when the .com started to bust. But PDC and the CalBearer organization put some $10 million into a building down there, the one that we now occupy as the Portland Development Commission, for the sole purpose of having companies move in there and having them incubate in the creative services. In fact, across the street from us was an advertising museum, right? Yes. Yeah. And so there was this belief that the creative services were, and that was web development, that was advertising, that was this whole idea that there was a creative energy in Portland, a creative industry in Portland that we wanted to feed and nurture. That fell on its face, and Pete, for a couple of years, as he and I were colleagues, was responsible for trying to make that happen, but it was really a difficult task at the time because the cost to redevelop that building was turned into rents that really were impossible to achieve at the time. So PDC decided to move in themselves. We were paying for the building anyway. We had master leased the building. And so PDC in 2003 decided to move in. Right around that time, a colleague of ours, mine at the time, Bruce Allen, was working on improving 3rd and 4th Avenue, what we call the streetscape improvement. It was something that the neighborhood truly, truly wanted. It was part of the visions plan. And at the time, PDC had done a number of projects that were literally build it and hope that people will come. And this was a project where we had committed a lot of our own money, $7.5 million, to improve the streetscapes. The Chinese garden neighborhood. And we were hoping that with improvements of these streetscapes that we would be able to attract more and more businesses and potentially more middle-income housing projects. And that really didn't happen. And it's probably because we didn't require it. And it's a lesson that I think we learned quite a bit. Don't build it hoping that people will come. Build it only if they do come. And that's what we did when we did this again. What we did again was the Aiken Burnside Development Framework, and this is when the Oregon College of Oriental Medicine started to get involved. Very quickly, we had looked at, we were concerned that the money that the public was spending was going to run out. We wanted to see what last big effort we could invest into the community and where we might be able to do that. At the same time, the Portland Saturday Market, which is the oldest continuous running jewelry craft market in the country, had been operating at the generosity of both public and private property owners. They operated on a street that was owned by the city. They operated on private property. They had bought a building with our assistance, and they weren't able to maintain that building, and they were going to have to let go of that building. And that building was strategically purchased so that they could continue to operate right around it. If you guys remember where Saturday Market used to operate, right around the Skidmore building, that was done strategically, but they weren't going to be able to hold on to it. And at the time, there was a lot of interest about a public market as well. We had done this major study called the Waterfront Development Opportunity Study, and we were looking at the area essentially between the Morrison Bridge and the Burnside Bridge. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but the idea was that we were going to consolidate a lot of property. We had decided, and this is important, to move the fire station. And that was a big deal, and this was right before I started working in the district. We were going to move the fire station from where it is right now, about 3 blocks away, and we went through a lot of effort to buy a piece of property that we lovingly referred to as Block 8, that had the Globe Hotel on it, which you guys are going to now occupy. We bought that to build a new fire station, and then we were going to take the old fire station, we were going to either tear it down or retrofit it as something very, very different, and also try to do something with that Skidmore building that we ultimately thought that we would come back into ownership. That is what we used to call catalytic development. Do something big, hope that other people are going to follow by all the energy that is created by the public and private investment that occurs with that catalytic first investment. Well, what we ended up doing was a plan B, and it ended up being a great plan B. We couldn't move the fire station, and the reason we couldn't move the fire station is that it got way too expensive. We got ourselves into a pickle by designing a building without really having much control of the budget. The budget got out of hand, and the mayor of the city, along with the commissioner in charge of the fire bureau at the time, decided that this was just getting ridiculous, and there was just no way we were going to be able to afford that fire station. At the same time, at exactly the same time, we were figuring out how to create a permanent home for Saturday Market, and lo and behold, 2 other very surprising things happened. One, the University of Oregon, with their developer, Art DeMiro, chose, and Art was able to negotiate with the NATO family to buy the building across from where you're going to be, which is now the University of Oregon. And Mercy Corps decided that after looking at 60+ different sites, near Brad's, other developments all over the city, decided, as an epiphany, apparently, to the executive director, Neil Kenninghire, oh my God, I need to be in Old Town Chinatown. And so this was very fortuitous. It was luck, absolute luck. But what our mission then was to make this all work. And so what we did is we really changed course in what we were doing at the time, because we took that waterfront development opportunity study work that we had done, and that was a plan, and we carved out a portion of it which we called Ankeny-Burnside, because that's where most of the work was going to be done. And it ended up becoming an effort to revitalize an area that basically went from just the other side of the fire station, which is at Ash, all the way up to Davis. So that whole area along Nato Parkway. And what we were able to put together was about 20 some odd million in public investment and $100 million in total investment to revitalize the 3 buildings that are now the University of Oregon and other businesses that are in that building with them. The Mercy Corps building, which is a combination of a historic building and a new building right next to it. A revitalization of the fire station, because we ended up as a city putting some $15 million into upgrading that fire station, because that was always the plan. That thing was not seismically upgraded. If we had a disaster, we would not have a fire station #1 in Portland, and now we will. And then there was also an investment advisory firm that decided to buy a building just on the other side of the fire station. And we spent a lot of money improving Waterfront Park for multiple purposes, but essentially for Saturday Market, so that Saturday Market could have a place that was built with them in mind, and that they could be assured of a permanent home. This was our gesture in acknowledging that this had become one of the most important Portland icons in the city. Any article that's ever written about Portland mentions Saturday Market. It's always a picture of Saturday Market. You see the Saturday Market sign. And that's 300 plus individual businesses that we support as well. So the Ankeny-Burnside development framework was one where we did it differently from that streetscape that I was telling you about. It was one where we would make that investment only if we had these other private partners. Private partners can be institutions. They don't necessarily have to be private businesses. In this particular case, that's what it was. So that was all in the works and going, and the Oregon College of Oriental Medicine was honing in on the Globe Hotel, and that was great. What are we going to do next? Well, what we wanted to do next was look at some property in the north part of Chinatown. And at the same time, there was a long interest, and if you read that visions plan, and it's worth reading, it's an easy read, there's always been an interest in having a grocery store in Old Town Chinatown, an Asian grocery store. And so everybody always said, we've got to get one, what are we going to do? And when anybody talked about it, they talked about Uwajimaya. And there was a very specific occasion during Chinese New Year in 2007 where a leader in the Chinese community, Stephen Yu, who I think many of you know, took one of my colleagues and marched them over to Uwajimaya and said, to a leader at the Uwajimaya organization, and said, this is Sarah Harpole from the Portland Development Commission, you guys have to move down here. And Uwajimaya, the gentleman said, well, as a matter of fact, we're really thinking about it. And we went up to Seattle and talked to them, and they started to look at where they might want to locate a second store in Portland. And they had a tug to try to do that in the historic Chinatown. One of the other things that I think is very, very important to mention in all of this, and I think it's an important thing to consider as this district may continue to play out, is that there are 2 national historic districts in this area. One of them is a national landmark historic district, and I always emphasize that because landmark means it's unique to the country, that there is something represented there that represents a part of the United States history that's important to preserve in one way or another. In the Skidmore Old Town National Landmark Historic District is important because during the late 1800s, Portland was one of the boom towns that flourished with cast iron facades. And our district down there, as strange as it may seem, has what I believe is the 2nd largest collection of cast iron buildings in the country. The first being New York, the second being Little Portland, Oregon. You will notice, and I've been always amazed, I've only lived here 10, 11 years, listeners how many firsts are in Portland. Our train station is the oldest train station west of the Mississippi. Our art museum was the first art museum in the West. I mean, over and over again, Portland had a lot of things that it had that were first at the time. And of course, because it was the end of the Continental Railroad. The other district is New Chinatown, Japantown, and that's to reflect the culture of the Japanese and the Chinese who lived there for many, many, many years. And that district has not been able to figure out how to preserve its history. And I'd say that the Skidmore Old Town district hasn't been able to figure it out either, but at least we've been able to do some things to get it jump-started. And I think University of Oregon's decision to move into this neighborhood and be a catalyst in and of themselves, and Mercy Corps' decision to do the same thing. And because of those two and the commitment that Oregon College of Oriental Medicine made, we also brought another organization, and they did it on their own, Northwest Evaluation Associates. With the Port of Portland's move out to the airport, that whole building got filled with one tenant, and it's a nonprofit that was spurred out of the Portland school system. They do testing. There are 400 highly paid people who now work in that Portland building, and Northwest Evaluation Associates, which had been located out in Lake Oswego, decided on their own that they wanted to make a difference in their community and move down to Old Town Chinatown. So the reason I want to bring them into the fold is not only have we brought to date with commitments $100 million worth of investment, and that includes you, but we've also been able to bring a couple of organizations that really attract that many more people into the district. University of Oregon probably brings almost 20,000 attendees to events down there. And the number we've used for the Oregon College of Oriental Medicine is 24,000 patient visits, moving up to some 30,000 patient visits as you expand. And that's really important. It's not just people who have their businesses down there, and the business community has started to flourish again. But it's also the people who are now coming into this neighborhood. Michael was reminding me, well, you know, the big thing is how we revitalize areas is more and more eyes on the street. Well, when you have another 31,000 people coming into this neighborhood every year, in a Saturday market, which, by the way, has been incredibly successful since they reopened, incredibly successful, there are a lot more people coming to Old Town Chinatown than ever used to. So the one area that we continue to want to work on, and by we I say all of us who really care about this neighborhood, it's not necessarily just the city and the public sector, but all of us who really care, is housing. And that's something that we need to continue to work on. I think there's been some good movement in that direction, and unfortunately the Portland Development Commission as an agency is no longer responsible for that. That's something that happened during all of this. But there's still a very, very strong desire in the neighborhood for a larger variety of housing to be in that neighborhood. I think that's something that we always have, that we have to continue to discuss, because it's also the city's nightlife neighborhood. And how does that all work? Well, there have been some great things that have worked. Through a lot of controversy that resulted from citing a couple of social service agencies, one being the Blanchet House, the other one being Transition Projects, a lot more involvement came from the residents, which we helped bring down there. One was, well, we did, and then the NATO family did. We did through a project that was Old Town Lofts. So there is a condominium in Old Town Chinatown. And because we were looking at possibly locating two of these community-based organizations right across the street from them, those residents started to get involved. There's nothing like a crisis to get people involved, right? And the other was the NATO's decision to sell McCormick Pier as a condominium. So those were, and although that's not in the heart of Old Town Chinatown, that is Old Town Chinatown. And those residents started to get involved as well. So one thing that has come out of this whole vision stuff that I mentioned to you is that there are more residents that are getting involved. There are more new businesses that are getting involved. And so it's not just the property owners and the community-based organizations who are trying to figure out the next steps in this neighborhood. It is now residents as well. And that has made a big difference. And I think we're going through some growing pains with that right now, and we're all looking at each other to see how well that's working and how it's not working. So how can we think about this neighborhood moving forward? The number one thing that I will tell to you, and Michael and I